Hi, everybody. My name's Bridget, and I'm the MC for this session. I hope you're all having a great EAGxVirtual so far. So this session is a live Q&A with Marcus Davis. Marcus is a co-founder and co-executive director at Rethink Priorities, where he leads research and strategy. He's also a co-founder of Charity Entrepreneurship and Charity Science Health, where he previously systematically analyzed global poverty interventions, helped manage partnerships, and implemented the technical aspects of the project. So Marcus has told me that he's very happy to answer a whole range of questions in this session. So this is your chance to, I guess, throw some questions at the co-ED of Rethink Priorities. You can submit your questions either using your name or anonymously using the box to the right-hand side of this video. And you can vote for your favorite questions to push them up higher in the queue, and then they're more likely to get answered. And we'll try to get through as many as we can in the next hour. So we may as well get straight into it. So first of all, Marcus, thanks very much for joining us at EAGxVirtual.
Thank you. And thank everyone, I guess, who's watching. And yeah, thank you very much for that kind introduction, Bridget. I'm happy to be here.
Great. Well, I thought just maybe to start us off, if you could perhaps give us a bit of a background on or an overview of Rethink Priorities. So a little bit on the history of the organization, what your aims are, and what work you're currently doing, I guess, towards those aims.
Yeah, so Rethink Priorities was founded in 2018 by Peter Herford and myself. So we are a think tank. We broadly want to do research to help improve decision-making at large organizations, among EAs, and just generally use research to try to make the world a better place. So we cover a number of causes. We're primarily focused on non-human animals, but we also do work on long-termism. Particularly last year, we spent a good deal of the year doing work on nuclear weapons. That work was led by Luisa Rodriguez. But yeah, broadly, our goal is to use research to investigate areas that haven't been that well studied, things that are potentially very impactful, and to try to guide the decision-making of large donors, aligned organizations, or policymakers. And I guess I should note that while we began very humbly with 2 people, we now have a staff of 10.
Okay, very cool. That's very impressive. Yeah, so I guess you mentioned that Rethink covers a few different areas. How do you go about picking the areas that you choose to work on and what to focus on? And we've got a question that's focused specifically on, I guess, your plans to do long-termism related work and what factors go into deciding, I guess, where to put your energies.
Yeah, so from, I'd say, first principles, we think through like, what are the areas where we think we can have the highest impact? And when we began the organization, like when we first started out, Peter and I were really trying to get a sense of whether we could do anything at all that would be worthwhile, whether the research we were undergoing was going to be useful to the community, to others. And as we I guess, experiment with this, we decided, yes, we think this is useful. We think this is worth expanding the project. And at that point, we did a lot of thinking about the areas in which we could be making a serious impact. While I've mentioned already, animal work and also long-termism, there's additionally all our work done on movement building. So we run the EA survey every year. And it's, I guess, those 3 categories of things where I think we saw like the clearest case that we could be having a significant impact. How we came to this conclusion, I guess it's perhaps I'll give the short version. Basically, we look around the animal research space, and there just aren't that many players. It's definitely not the case that there aren't any existing people doing work. There's THL Labs, for example, which I think does a lot of high quality work. There's researchers at MFA or a lot of the other organizations, including including ACE, which is a meta organization doing research. But broadly speaking, compared to say global health or even compared to long-termism, there just aren't that many people working in the space. We think it's potentially a very high impact area, and given like lack of resources dedicated to it, we thought there's definitely like a strong case that if we were to spend significant resources in this domain, that we could get pretty good returns. As for the other cost areas, it's basically a similar case. The EA survey, if I'm not mistaken, has been run by Rethink Charity since before Rethink Priorities came to exist. But nevertheless, we think continuing to run that is a useful tool to the community. We think and have heard directly from leaders at other organizations that they find this tool useful and they want us to continue to do this work. As for long-termism, and I think I probably don't need to like relay the basic case for the long-term future mattering, but it would be nice if we all didn't die at some point in the near future. So I guess within that constraint, why focus on something like nuclear weapons rather than AI risk? I think we are Peter and myself are pretty drawn to I'd say type of quantitative work that type of approach that long-termism fits well in this domain. So trying to build models to better understand what their inherent risks are when there's significant data. In fact, our first project Peter and I worked on was actually something on vaccines where there's a lot of data out there, but there's not a lot of analysis from the perspectives that EAs kind of look at the world. This is all like high-level background on like from first principles. In any individual case, like any individual project we take up, given all of these background interests or like how we're looking at the broad scope of things, we then go about doing large-scale project prioritization, which while we're shooting for targets on different causes, the individual projects we're working on at any given time are a result of like I was going to say painstaking, but it's actually pretty fun to me, project prioritization process.
Yeah. I'm sure painstaking isn't the right word. I'm sure it is very fun, but I'm sure it's also a lot of work as well and takes a lot of time. I guess what's interesting for me about Rethink Priorities is that it's explicitly focused on informing the EA community. And as far as I'm aware, it seems to be one of the few or perhaps the only organization that explicitly has that focus. Is that correct? And was that like a specific tactical decision to retain that, I guess, central audience of the EA community?
Yeah, so I would say to the extent things we're working on are important to the broader community, we don't want to like not bring our work to them. But it is definitely the case that we deliberately thought about approaching like policymakers and policymakers, decision makers within the EA community, be they donors or organizations. It is definitely the case that if you look at existing EA organizations, a lot of them are either expending huge amounts of resources or expending huge amounts of like person hours and time working on projects. And while that is the case, it is definitely the case that even given that, there's a lot more work that could be done to inform, say, how their decisions are made or what grants they choose to hand out. To take the case, I guess, area we work in, animal welfare, Open Field has 3 people working on animals full time, and I think they're fantastic people, but it's just 3 people, right? If you're thinking about the space of all possible animal research topics, even if you're working like overdrive, it's just not that many relative to the scope of the problem. Given things like that, I think it's important to help. And it's also the case that I don't want to make this exclusively about what I think these organizations are doing. Like if these organizations shift up the number of staff they have on these topics, I still think a lot of the work we're doing will be useful. The broad quantitative approach we're trying to take, where we use data the best we can to understand what we should be doing, what's currently working, what has worked in the past, or what has not, is something that I think is very valuable, and that Peter and I definitely thought we could bring to the EA movement.
Yeah, right. So I guess just focusing on your work in the animal space for a second, what has that work caused you to change your mind on anything, or do you think it's changed how you think EA should be approaching that question, or change priorities?
So it's definitely true that a number of projects we've worked on have brought topics to me that I was just unaware were a thing. And it's also, even within the topics I was vaguely aware of, that I didn't have the positions I currently have. To take an extreme example, for example, I didn't know very much, not very surprisingly, about invertebrate sentience before we started to work on it. And after many months working on that project, along with Jason Schucraft and Danielle Walthorn, Max Carpendale, who was a contractor with us, Peter and myself, I really came to update more in the direction of it's plausible a wide range of these species are sentient, because I just hadn't examined the evidence. More fundamentally, on the question of like, did I come to think animal welfare is like more important because of the work we're doing? I'd say I came in thinking animal welfare was like pretty important, and I guess nothing I've seen in our research has deterred me from that position. I think if anything, I've probably like gained in thinking that it's probably like even more important. The scope is larger than I would have guessed at the time, because I wasn't really aware of say like the massive amounts of shrimp farming going on. Right now, Daniela Walkman is working on investigating the scope, the conditions, and the like possible interventions for shrimp. And there's something like 240 to 320 million shrimp killed a year. That's much more than land animals, and I was like basically completely unaware of the number here. So if you think about something like that, like the scope of animals that is under our concern is larger than I would have thought. And this doesn't even include the potential of wild animal welfare, which there aren't great numbers for the number of wild animals, but of course, what I've seen are the numbers are like, it would be laughable if it, I guess if the situation wasn't so possibly important, given that they all are sentient creatures.
Yeah. Do you think there's any low-hanging fruit or interventions that should be being explored in those spaces that currently aren't?
In wild animal welfare or invertebrates?
Yeah, either.
So wild animal welfare is an area where I feel like extreme uncertainty. So you can kind of categorize possible interventions into buckets of like things that decrease or increase the population. Excuse me, things that like decrease the population or of wild animals as some type of metric to try to say like these animals are suffering and we should do something about that suffering. Or you can think of things in the category of like, here's something that just reduces suffering while altering populations very much. That latter category feels like a lot more safe to me. Like I'm not at all confident that wild animals, like any given category of wild animals, needs a life that's overall negative or overall positive, or whether we should be trying to make large scale interventions that are potentially like very hard to reverse. And I guess given that constraint of not trying to alter populations that much, I imagine there's plausible interventions we can be doing that are relatively smaller in scale, but plausible to reduce the amount of suffering some animals are undergoing. I don't know how these particular interventions would compare to other animal interventions, or to, of course, cross species with to compare them to human interventions. But I'm pretty positive that there's some cases out there that we could find. All that said, I'm not sure we should be doing this right now, or whether we should be trying to understand the situation better to build up support and knowledge for larger scale interventions down the line, where we're much more confident in the direction of where we want to go. As for invertebrates, I'm pretty uncertain, but one thing I can say like pretty confidently, we should stop boiling things alive. It's like such a low bar, but given like even a reasonable chance of various creatures being sentient, it seems like wildly irresponsible to boil them alive. If you think about this is happening to not a lot of crustaceans, crabs and shrimp, or crabs and lobsters, and a number of other creatures. Snails, it's a good example. Like, well, obviously, I think the probability of sentience of snails is like much lower than a chicken. It's not like zero. It's much closer to something like 5% or something. In which case, you wouldn't take a 1/20th chance of like setting a human on fire. In which case, you have like 100% confidence that they are sentient. This is to ignore like tons of complications with interspecies comparisons, but the point remains that I think it's just wildly irresponsible. Whether we could get the public to support something like this is like a bunch of different questions, but it is clearly true that we should stop boiling things alive.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's a very good point. With Rethink Priorities, we're where's the scope of your research end? So do you confine yourself to just looking at those questions about, what interventions, broadly speaking, are worthwhile or need to be or should be better prioritized? Or do you also go into the weeds of what organizations or groups might be well positioned and, I guess, practical pathways to making change and things like that?
I'd say we are probably interested in the scope of like all possible research that would be useful, up to including the possibility of, say, here's a very specific security idea that we have found that is plausible. We do some investigations of interventions that are currently happening. For example, Solvis Shimshikas did an investigation of corporate campaigns, trying to see how cost effective they were. And that was looking at interventions that like currently in practice. I can imagine a very similar scenario in which someone's considering some intervention that they're not currently practicing. And we investigate like very thoroughly, not just to see how cost effective it would be, but to see how effective it is. And if it turned out that like, oh, we thought this is very effective, we would decide, hey, we're very interested in this idea. If someone like would want to start, we might want to give assistance or like help them with connections to academics or to people who are knowledgeable about the domain. So I'd say I'm pretty open to like a wide range of possible, or we're pretty open to a wide range of possible research, whether it be something like that, or if you're thinking more of like something like which organization would be best placed to do this. I guess I'd be a little harder pressed to I guess I'm not really sure what that means. If it means something like we think the government should do X, like we definitely in the domain of trying to figure out what policies are popular or possible to get passed or and so on. But I'm not sure if it means something like, well, I think CEA should do Y.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I think it does sound like you cover a pretty broad range there. I guess so. I'll move on to a slightly different question, which is from Slido. So in which ways is Rethink Priorities different to academic research institutes? What do you think academic research institutes could learn from you and you from them?
This is that's an interesting question. I would say, I guess to start with the latter question, perhaps this will answer the former. I would think that like one thing we could learn from academic institutes is just like years of experience in knowing like building up years of experience in the domain. Like for obviously we've only existed for 2.5 years. Only less than 2 years of that we've had significant staff, and in that time we've tried to, like, obviously everything we publish, we try to work very hard to make sure it's well informed and we speak with experts and so on. But it's also clearly the case that we don't have years and years of expertise to draw upon. It's also the case that academic institutes tend to have, I'd say, tend to have just extensive, one thing is like extensive staffs to focus on things. I don't have like a pool of grad students to call upon to do a bunch of work that I would like to see done. I'm not saying that necessarily it's always the best, but yeah, things like that jump out to me. What I would say, like fundamentally, we probably could learn from that is just I'm trying very hard right now to like trying hard to like professionalize the organization. I guess this is the common thing after you start something up. Try to make the organization sound, make sure we have great policies in place for handling various scenarios, make sure all of our corporate policies and things, boring things like that are sound. But I'd wager for the most part, academic institutions are pretty strong in this domain simply by years of experience. If I were to say something about research in particular, it would be like, it gets harder and would depend on the domain. Going the other direction about what I think academic institutes could learn from us is, I think this again will vary based on the field, but I am very comfortable saying something like, I don't know or we looked into this for X amount of time, and while it's important, we don't have time to look into it further, and just kind of leaving the best knowledge we can, given the time constraints or resource constraints, and saying like, this is basically all we can do here, and moving on. I don't think there's a lot of incentives to do work that includes even, I'd say, even marginal cases where something like that happens, even though it's really important that not everything you're going to do is going to be, you're not going to get across every T and dot every I, if you also want to take on all of the highest opportunity impact you can. The times when there's just clear diminishing marginal value of producing like getting that last iota of information out. All that said, this, of course, this varies a ton based on domain. Yeah, so I guess more fundamentally about like the way we publish things. So we're also publishing on the internet. Basically everything we do is like should default to being public. And I don't know if that's necessarily true of every academic institute. And I also would add that while we don't have one way we are probably similar, which is probably unclear to the outsiders, is that we definitely try to practice at least some type of informal peer review where we get all the experts we know or people we can to review our work. And that includes people at other EA organizations as well as academics and people from many disciplines, so that everything we put out is, I guess, has been reviewed in a deep sense before it's public.
Yeah, I was going to ask, so that touches on what I was going to ask next, was is about your choice to publish most of your work on the EA forum. Is that fair to say that that's like your primary area of publication? And I guess what you think about the benefits of that compared to taking other more traditional options of publication, so either putting out reports either on your website or in another format, and even going down the pathway of submitting to academic journals and having a more formal peer review process. Yeah, you could perhaps talk about your what you think the pros and cons of those different options are, and why you've gone the way you have.
Yeah, so to the extent we are trying to convince the EA community of things, or key decision makers in the EA community, it makes a ton of sense to publish on the EA forum. If you're trying to get information out to them, like this is plausibly a pretty good place to look to leave that information. Even more so than however much I would like it if everyone in the EA community read our website. Like we're much more likely to succeed at getting people's vision if you put it on the EA forum. So just fundamentally, if you don't particularly care about some type of like copywriting of your work, or making sure that you're getting this, we're not a for-profit company where we're generating hits from our website to make money. The important thing is getting it to the community you want to read it. So we like pretty heavily push towards the EA forum. All that said, it's still definitely the case that there are times when some work you might want done to be published in academic domains. Like people have come to me and said, "Hey, I very much would like to be able to cite some of your work, but it's not in a peer-reviewed journal, so like I can't really do so. It would be really helpful if you could do more of that." The clear trade-offs between pushing to get things published in academic journals, both in like time costs and how hard it is, or and also like access to the broader public when you do so. To the extent that I think this may be changing more, but some journals like don't even want you to like publish things anywhere else if you publish it in the journal, even if like you wrote the thing. And of course, you're happy to send papers to people, but it's very different. And I don't think this is a huge drawback, but I'm pushing. I would say I'm thinking that we could probably do more publishing things such that it appears in like Google Scholar, whether that be publishing things in what pre-publication, such that like if you searched for a related topic, our work would come up, and that's probably like low-hanging fruit. The higher bar would be something like maybe we're thinking about influencing a certain policymaking community because we've come to some conclusion, and we really think, in addition to the EA community saying this, it'd be really important to get this in some academic journal. I think that's something we're like actively exploring. depending on the project. Like we are in fact in touch with a few academics who would like us to push more in that direction, and I'm like, I welcome that.
Yeah, that's some good points about the trade-offs there. I think there is definitely trade-offs, and there's a lot of problems with trying to get things published in academia. And it's, I guess, nice to be able to avoid some of those, and you probably got more flexibility in working outside there. So I guess a kind of related question is about how receptive other groups are to your research, and related to that, how you make sure your research is being seen and used by the people that might be able to make the best use of it.
So I would say this is high variance category. So there are definitely times where like what we may work on something and we think it's like, oh, this is really important, and I try to present to someone, and they might not, at least at first glance, understand why you might think it's important. But one way you can drastically improve things here is what I think we try to do is talk to people on a regular basis, get their feedback of what they think is important. We try to incorporate this. I mentioned project prioritization. One big thing we do in project prioritization is to think through like who are the key parties here and what do they think is important to work on, like what are the key challenges they see they're facing in their work. If you produce work that they think is valuable, when you later present back to them, hey, here's what we found, we looked into the thing you thought was important, they're much more likely to just listen to you. Also, and this is generally true, this doesn't apply just to EA, but the more you like actually know the people you're trying to convince, like the more you can like talk to them. Hey, have you heard this? When you I don't know, when you do networking at events like this, and you talk to people and you get to know them and like what they like or dislike, the barrier for just can like the barrier for getting them to look at the thing you have done goes down. Mm-hmm. As far as making sure our work is used, we try to make sure that our work is read like by the important parties. We in addition to publishing things in the EA forum, if we publish something that we think is particularly important to a certain domain, we will like directly reach out to those parties and say, hey, have you read this? Here's what the main conclusions are. We'd be happy to chat, right, and give them the opportunity to directly speak with you about the topic.
And are people generally pretty receptive to that? Do you get a good response to when you reach out directly?
I mean, mostly. I don't think we have done. Maybe this would change. I think maybe I was going to say we don't have like quantitative data on this. Maybe I will start to track this.
Yeah. I understand you did an impact evaluation. Was it last year? What were the main findings of that? Was there anything in particular that was surprising to you, or yeah?
We I guess for those who might be unaware, we ran a survey last year, like impact survey, trying to figure out whether people read our work, whether they thought it was important, whether they found it charities based on it, or decided to stop or start supporting the intervention based on this. I'd say the major takeaways are, we polled maybe like 100 people we think are particularly relevant, and maybe a little more than that. And the major takeaways were like, a lot of people read a considerable amount of our work. There weren't that many like clear like career changes based on some work we put out. Some of that, of course, maybe selection effects targeting the people we're targeting, or maybe we're probably much more likely to be in a position like grant making or higher up in an organization that aren't going to like change their careers that much. But if you're looking for whether someone stopped or started a charity or stopped or started an intervention based on this, there wasn't a lot of, I'd say like significant, like clear, we caused X big change to happen. And this is something where I think we have a big focus of thinking we're going to exist as a research organization. It's probably going to be a lot of variance in the impact of the research you put out, where some of it is like not that big a change, but every now and then you hear something that's like really massive. I'd say one way to think about our work would be thinking about things that are like deep EA considerations about the distribution of resources. Some other things may be like more marginal. Well, here's something that's already happening. Should we shift resources slightly this direction or another based on that? Or thinking about things that are more like, well, here's this completely like new intervention idea. where no one's really explored this or no one's researched this topic at all. And how does this compare to existing domains? And while I think last year we did a lot of work that was worthwhile and valuable, we didn't produce it like, oh, here's a charity that could be funded for $2 million a year that no one has looked into yet. I would hope that we would do something like that. I'd say a big goal is to produce this type of work, but not every project falls in that category. Some work we're doing kind of falls into like the scoping domain, where that's something like that's not that plausible. Other work we do, something like our shrimp welfare work that I mentioned earlier, will fall into that domain. Whereas our work would say moral weight and moral status that Jason has been working on is much more in the big EA consideration, because it might imply that the distribution of resources within animals and between humans and non-animals should be significantly shifted. However, it also may be the case that like it ends up saying that actually this is roughly okay, but the expectation before you looked into it is very difficult to know.
Yeah, it seems like as I said, you guys cover a really broad scope of questions, and that probably right from fundamental research to implementation and something that's a bit more on the other end of the scale. So that probably makes it hard to evaluate impact. So there's a few questions here around, I guess, the role of Rethink Priorities in the EA landscape of organizations. And I think it's a pretty cool space we're in at the moment, that there are quite a few different EA organizations doing research. So I guess, where do you think Rethink Priorities fits in that landscape? How should people think of you in comparison to something like the GiveWell or the Sentience Institute or Forethought Foundation or Global Priorities Institute? And also, do you coordinate with different groups in the EA space to ensure that you're not working on the same questions, or to work out who might be best placed to work on questions?
That second one's much easier. The answer is yes. So we definitely talk to other organizations to figure out what they're working on before deciding what we want to do. Sometimes that means deferring to other organizations. Sometimes it means collaborating, or sometimes it may mean, oh, we both think it's important and we have different approaches. Let's both work this through, and of course get feedback on each other's work as it proceeds. That applies both to like, I say that applies to individual projects more so than like broad causes. As to how Rethink Priorities compares to other research organizations, I can just basically say we are not in the global poverty charity evaluation space, and just like defer that GiveWell has that. I'm going to trust that GiveWell produces really high quality information there, and like they have that. You're just not in that domain. I'd say to a lesser degree, organizations like GPI, they're looking at more. I'd say they're doing pretty foundational research questions on things that I guess fall into that category I mentioned earlier of like big EA considerations. What will happen with what will happen that could affect the way you think about which causes should we be throwing the most resources into, or like what are huge considerations within those causes. Some of our work falls into that category, but a lot of it does not. So the specific intervention research we're doing definitely doesn't fit into that category at all. And while there are questions like what's the value of, what's the capacity of welfare for different species, which could fall both, say, on GPI's agenda and on ours. For the most part, I think our agendas are pretty non-overlapping, and while actually we probably should do more communication with them, for the most part, it's just not that applicable. I guess as for other organizations, there are definitely other organizations that are closer to what we're doing. I'd say I think THO Labs, when you think about our animal welfare work, THO Labs does a lot of high quality work on running studies that are relevant, or running doing literature reviews and other quantitative work in our domain. And we interact with them like a lot. I spoke with Jacob Peacock, who runs THL Labs, on Thursday, right? Like I know what they're up to, and we keep in good touch, and for he and for PHL Labs and for other related organizations, there's a lot of collaboration about what we're working on and what we think is important.
Okay, cool. Got a few questions about the organization itself. So I guess one of them is what do you think is the biggest bottleneck for Rethink Priorities growing? And also, I guess as a carry on from that, if you were able to overcome that bottleneck, what would you what would you be doing? Where would you put your additional capacity?
So I'd say structurally, if I think about what our bottlenecks are, like we could use additional staff, and that comes down to, do we have the funds to be able to hire additional people? So right now, I would say we have like a backlog of surveys we want to run with various organizations. And this largely actually directly, I guess, to follow up on the last question, in collaboration with other aligned organizations on a number of topics, like multiple ones running on welfare. There's studies we ran last year we want to write up. There's working on in the long-term space. There's a wide variety of surveys we'd like to get done, but in order for that to happen, we need to have someone to actually run the data analysis and someone to write these things up, and we just staff limited by the amount of hours we have that we could throw at that. So that's like one example of where we're clearly bottlenecked by staff on that constraint. And there's also just when we do project prioritization or when we talk to other organizations, it's every time there's like a list of projects we think are high value, that other people think are high value, that we would like to investigate, which we just can't do because there's not enough time. And this includes interventions people are currently working on, things where they're trying to maximize the impact of something that's definitely going to happen, and we can do some research to help them devote their resources more effectively. And this includes things that are more fundamental. So I mentioned that moral weight project. Like this is like an initial scoping. A proper job there may be like very extensive. We're talking like many person years worth of work. And of course, it's not necessarily always a case that if you could do something worth 2 or 3 years worth of work is worth doing. Is definitely the case that if you look across the number of projects that we and others think are worthwhile that we could be working on, we don't have enough staff to execute them all simultaneously.
So is it more a question of funding, or is it managerial capacity, or?
I mean, so this would be funding.
Okay. All right, and there's another question about it. It kind of feels a little bit almost rude to be asking about money, but I think it's fine for us to be doing that here. Where does most of your funding come from?
Most of our funding comes from large aligned foundations. So we get grants from OpenPhil, and from the EA funds. So a large chunk of our money comes from those parties. Our grants, all of those grants are public. You can look them up, and combined they make up a large fraction of our support. After that, we have like another bucket of say a good chunk of individual donors who are giving significantly less than those like very large foundations, but still like large amounts of money. And perhaps after that, there's a smaller basket of more normally sized donations. It's still like significant, still an important part of our budget, but that's basically the breakdown.
Yeah, okay. And I guess given that you're explicitly focusing on informing the EA community, it makes sense that most of your funding comes from within the EA space.
I guess I should follow up and say I very much would like our funding to be more diversified. Like one of the things that I personally am working on a lot is making sure that's the case.
Yeah. Okay. Why is that?
I mean, if you're running an organization, it's just very valuable to have more, like a wider range of donors to work with, or more support. I mean, as much as I love the work that OpenPhil or the EA funds have done, it's just the case that you would like to have to be more independent of a few donors. to some extent, I would guess that the EA funds or OpenField wouldn't want you to be solely reliant upon them. In fact, OpenField is like state policies to like not support more than 50% of the organization, which means if we're particularly for an organization like us, which is like really inward EA looking, like it's important that like we draw money from other organizations.
Yeah. Do you think you need to change your, I guess, the way you're doing things in order to attract different sorts of funding and to achieve that diversification?
I wouldn't say change the way we're doing things, except unless you mean change the way we're fundraising. I think there's a lot of interesting parties that we could draw support from, which we haven't already, because of this would come down to prior management time constraint. We just hired a director of operations, Abraham Rowe, who previously was the executive director of Wild Animal Initiative, and that's helping me spend significantly less time on operations, and that's just like gold as far as being able to focus more on fundraising strategy or what our goals are, making more like detailed plans to pitch to funders.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I wasn't very specific there. I was, I guess, trying to get at, do you think you need to change your research priorities at all in order to attract more funding, or do you think that you'll be able to do that without having to, I guess, alter your vision?
Naturally, I think everyone who's running a research organization would say this, but I think it is true that we can both do the things I think are very high value and get funding for them. I don't want to say like, do you think projects I think are significantly less valuable because I think someone will support them? Of course, there's obviously a trade-off here. If I thought the only thing was worth, like clearly the number one thing worth doing was just get no support, would I not do the number two thing? Like no, like I would do the number two thing. But there's definitely the case where like I don't want to be trading off against doing things I think are not that valuable just because I think someone will support it. I'd rather do something else rather than just do like completely do work that I think is not worth doing.
Yeah. So I've got a slightly more specific question here. How do you work on comparing the suffering of humans versus non-human animals? Is that something that you've been looking at Rethink? And yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
That's a really easy question. Yeah, so it is hard. The first thing I would say, if you're thinking about trading off between humans and non-humans, there's just a number of dimensions in which you have to think about where they differ or where they're the same. I guess the first thing up is the obvious advantage humans have of the ability to make long-term changes to the world, to update, to improve things for other animals. Basically, all other animals lack this capacity, and in doing so, it becomes very difficult to whatever your philosophical opinions about the variance in capacity for welfare or more status, like whatever your opinions about that, is clearly true that humans have this additional huge advantage. And that difference alone is very difficult to understand. Well, how many humans worth of value would I get out of, say, decreasing the suffering of 100 chickens, right? Like people give answers to those questions, and in some sense, I guess most organizations give implicit answers to those questions. But I think fundamentally, it's just extremely difficult to know what the correct answer is. All that said, I think like work like what Jason, who works with us, has been doing is trying to get a better grasp on the underlying philosophical dilemma, and that philosophical dilemma is. While I said philosophical, it's also there's just a ton of scientific questions that go into answering like what I think is the correct answer there. I am, I guess, I'm very consequentialist, so that means if I'm thinking about what the variance in capacity of welfare is across these different species, say I'm thinking about, well, how much can this animal suffer? How fast is this temporal perception, which is actually one thing Jason's working on and planning to release some work on. And if you think about, say, how animals differ on this domain, you may think they're more or less valuable. And this goes for a number of other dimensions, whether it be the intensity of their experiences at all. So like some animals may experience an individual like pain or pleasure more intensely on average than other animals, and something like that might matter a lot, or something like phenomenal unity. So maybe this is more speculative, but perhaps there are creatures, I guess up to including perhaps humans, that have more than one state experience happening at the same individual time. So split brain patients is perhaps the best known case of this, where it looks like something like this may be going on, where one hemisphere of your brain may be experiencing the world separately from the other hemisphere of your brain. Of course, I don't know what the probability of something like that is being true, but something like that might influence what you think about things on this domain. Octopuses would probably be a good example of something where they have a decentralized system, decentralized nervous system, where this might be something like this might be the case. So these type of considerations are ultimately like hard scientific questions, which determine how I think about capacity for welfare, and capacity for welfare any given moment is how I think about these type of trade-offs. But again, this is all like a sub-problem of the larger set of like, you have to take all these considerations and then compare them to how but humans could improve the world. And you have to compare that to, well, humans could improve the world, but also some portion of them do, like basically don't have a significant impact one direction or another. And then some portion of them are like doing really extreme things. And you have to figure out, well, what do I think about all of these trade-offs? I don't have a clear answer to how I think about this trade-off overall, given all of these uncertainties.
Yeah, well, it's certainly a very big question. I think you've done a good job of like outlining just how complicated it is and what the uncertainties are. We are getting towards the end of the session, and I thought it'd be interesting for the audience to hear about your experience in starting up an organization, and I guess your thoughts on whether more people in effective altruism should be looking at starting their own organization, and if so, what advice you give to people.
Yeah, so I guess I'll begin with my own story. So when I started to intern at Cherry Science in I guess summer of 2015, I wasn't really confident this would be the direction of my career. I thought this was a great opportunity. I thought their organization was impactful and that I could potentially help. And in doing so, I took that internship. And in taking that internship, I was eventually offered a job to help start Charity Entrepreneurship. And again, I thought this is a great opportunity. I'm not sure that this is going to be my long-term career path, but this sounds like potentially high value. And as Charity Entrepreneurship ended, I helped start Charity Science Health. It was there when I really started, I guess, to think more about fundamentally about, should organizations be starting things? Excuse me, should EAs be starting things? What is worth value, and what's valuable to start, and how would you go about that? I guess while I was there, I started to get more into research and started to think both myself and people who were at Cherry Science at the time were thinking about, well, here's like a big list of possibly really important questions, a lot of them which would kind of fall into the domain of some of the big EA considerations I mentioned earlier that are important to resolve if you're going to know which cause to focus on, or how to try to make progress within those causes. And when I started to think about that, it started to become more appealing to maybe start something to try to answer some of those hard questions. As for whether, I guess this basically brings me to, after doing that, I left Cherry Science and started Rethink Priorities, basically to try to answer some of those big questions. And whether other people should be doing it is such a hard question. Ultimately, when I decided to start Rethink Priorities, I had a big spreadsheet of here are my plausible career paths, and here's what how much money I think I'd make doing this. Here's how much impact I think I have. Here's my counterfactual. Here's what these other organizations would do if they didn't hire me, or here's where I roughly spend my money if I was going to say into earning the give. And it worked out in this spreadsheet roughly. When I thought about all my options, it seemed plausible that someone with my particular background, someone with my particular skill set, or in some case lack of skills, I don't have a background in biology or biochemistry, whereas if someone else was in a similar position thinking about starting something up, maybe the stronger career path option would be to go into bios. So it really turned out to be the case that, like, well, in given my circumstances, I thought it was wise to start something. I think it has worked out. I would hope others would agree. I think Rethink Priorities is worth doing. I think it's worth having. But as to whether any individual should be like more focused on starting things up, like it's a very difficult question to answer in the abstract. There definitely like there are places, like particular domains, where maybe something may make sense. But like just conceptually, some type of project-based things may make sense. But if I had like strong takes about that, you probably already would have heard about it through, like, we would have researched it. It's like, yes, definitely someone should start organization doing Y in this domain. So I don't have any particularly strong opinions about, in the abstract, whether EA should start things.
Yeah. Okay. If you could give advice to yourself when you were perhaps just doing your intern at Charity Science, what advice would you give? Or if there's anything you do differently from that point?
Because one advantage of being a Charity Science, we're a small organization. I got a chance to do a lot of things. I got a chance to try to do cost-effective analysis, where I look back on and think, like, those weren't. I could have done better. I just like I probably would spend more time at the time doing. This is like, I guess, perhaps too personal. I would probably spend more time just learning how to manipulate R, which comes up more in like doing data analysis. Like I spent a lot of time at the time, like, learning Python, like R's, like where R's where the action is. If we were doing stats, I guess to give something more generally applicable, it would probably be something like try to gain skills that are cross applicable across a lot of domains. Like I'm kind of joking about using R, but the general skill of doing data analysis is like really important if you want to do quantitative modeling of basically any kind.
Yeah, okay. And I feel like that's quite a useful piece of advice to tell people that they should be learning R instead of Python.
I mean, I don't take that too seriously. Like, okay. I'm sure that I say that as like it depends on your field. Like if you're working in like science, maybe it's more common to use Python. It varies wildly. Python is actually one of the most popular programming languages. It's also great compared to R. That's like a personal opinion of using the two languages.
Yeah. Okay. So I feel like we've asked you quite a few difficult questions in this Q&A session so far. And another one, which is the top voted question, which I'll just note was sent in by Peter Herford, is why is Marcus so fabulously handsome? There's no answer. Expect the same level of rigor that you used for the question on comparing human and non-human sentiment.
I'm going to build a model and run my DNA through quantitative analysis to figure it out. I'll get back to him after 6 months and $500,000 go into this project.
Okay, well, I'm going to keep an eye out on the EA forum for the results of that analysis. So we are coming towards the end of the session, and I guess just to finish up, it'd be good to hear, I guess, your vision for Rethink Priorities, and I guess what if we were to have another chat again this time next year, what you would like to be able to say had happened in the intervening time, and what your goals are for the next year and also more broadly.
Yeah. So I break this up into like I guess where I'd like to see the organization be and like what I would have liked to see the organization produce. So one thing I mentioned is we're trying to professionalize and do better at like being set up more sustainably for the long-term operation. Like, so there are a lot of things like that falls into this kind of like boring bucket of like running organization that we'd like to see. And then there's more substantive research questions like, research results. Like I would like to have seen us investigate some topic where, I've mentioned this before, where it's plausible, like, hey, someone could start a charity doing this particular thing and no one's doing it. Here's an area you could look at. I would like to see that happen. Uncovering investigation like that, uncovering opportunity like that would be obviously high value. I can go more into specifics of particular domains we're working in. We're thinking a lot about animal welfare options in in the EU and thinking about, well, what's something that might be high value in that domain. And I think if we were to identify, if we were to identify something that was a particularly strong opportunity, it might be the case that additional grant making can be done in that domain. And so obviously trying to find something worthwhile there is like pretty pressing. I guess more structurally, I would like it to be the case that our work is just like is more more useful to the people we're interacting with. So like, so be it donors or organizations, and make sure that like when we produce work, they clearly think that this is valuable. We'll learn some of this by surveying people, but we're also learn some by whether that people actually change their actions. And that's hard to say like what exactly it looks like, but it might be the case that it depends so much on what the results of some of these projects are. If we discover this is worth changing and see if people actually move in that direction. I guess other thing I would say is I would like to see us grow. I think that we are, as I mentioned, I think we're staff constrained, and I would like to see us be able to no longer feel that way, where we have enough researchers on staff to handle the projects that I think are all high value at the same time. I guess finally, I would say that I would hope that we're able to I guess this is all. I guess it's taking all too abstractly. I was thinking about how the world is kind of the pandemic is still going on. There's a reason we're doing this virtually. I was thinking, making sure everything is still going well. Subsequently, I just hope I want the best for everyone works for us and everyone who's in the EA community. Make sure that like we're all we're still staying healthy at the end of all of this.
Yeah, I think it's a good note to finish on as well. Yeah, just being mindful that you need to look after yourself as well. But it sounds like there's a lot of interesting work that is currently happening and will be happening over the next 12 months or so at Rethink Priorities. So it would be good to keep an eye out on the results of that. So we are at the end of the session. Marcus, thanks very much for joining us and providing your insights here at EAGxVirtual today. And thank you to everybody at home who's watching. And that's the end of the session. I hope you enjoy the rest of the virtual conference. Okay, bye-bye.